Hello, in this video we're going to be talking about carbohydrates. So let's not wasting your time, let's get right to it. Now as we're talking carbohydrates, man, super important concept. You hear about carbs all the time from a diet standpoint, from a energy standpoint, and you got two camps. Well, I really got three camps. I'm in that third camp. I don't care, man. I just eat, love to eat. But you got your camp one that, man, you got to watch your carbs. You got to cut carbs down as a weight loss process. Your second group, kind of especially your athletes, your college athletes, high school athletes, whatever. They're like giving carbs. Carbs are energy. And it's such a scientific process. I mean, if you read about athletes at the college level, I mean, I wanted to say major college, but I'm sure like a Pitt State does it as well, where the process of understanding the release of energy from foods has been so studied that athletes at, say, like the University of Kansas, they know exactly what time an athlete needs to eat in order to benefit from those energies as they're being released. Like, for example, if we got a game at 6 o'clock, okay, then here's what we need to eat and when we need to eat it, so we're receiving max energy during the contest. That's some pretty good research right there. But carbohydrates provide energy, okay, in the form of glucose, and we get that from some of the foods that we eat, the grains, fruits, vegetables, that type of stuff. Now, so say you eat food and you get those sugars, glucose molecules. You're going to store that as glycogen. Your body's going to convert that. Glycogen simply is just a very usable form of the glucose molecule. Now, if you're a plant, which you're not, but plants store it as starch. And so when you hear about starches, things like potatoes and things that are rich in starches, so all three are kind of the same thing. They're just converted a little bit differently because that's the best way that that particular organism can store it for long-term storage. So plants make glucose and then they store it for themselves as starches. We eat those and then our bodies convert them to glycogen to store for when we need it. A super unique property of carbohydrates is that their molecular structure, their chemical structure, is in a very definite ratio. A 1 to 2 to 1 ratio is what we call it. And that simply means that there's, for every one carbon, there's one oxygen, but there are two hydrogens. So like a glucose molecule that has 6 carbon, 12 hydrogens, 6 oxygen, that makes it a carbohydrate. And when you see carbohydrate names, you're going to see the word saccharide. That's a reference to sugars. So you'll see a disaccharide, a monosaccharide, a polysaccharide. Those are references to sugars. And I just said this, but there are 3 types of carbohydrates. There are monosaccharides, which would be 1, okay, and that's those monomers that we talked about in a previous video. A disaccharide would be 2 monomers put together, di meaning 2 in this case. And then you got your polysaccharides, which again, typically the word poly means many, but in this instance, in the carbohydrates, it just means more than 2. Alright, so when we're talking monosaccharides, we're talking one particular sugar, okay, one subunit, and some examples of those are like glucose and fructose and galactose. Those are complex molecules, but there's just one. That would be a monosaccharide. And of course, you're going to see that OSE suffix on sugars, that tells you that they're a sugar. Anytime you see a word in a science setting, a name that has an OSC at the end, that means that they're a sugar. Now, an important topic to think about is the function of carbohydrates. And of course, it's something you're going to need for the test or quizzes, things like that. But the function of the carbohydrates, is the one, we've talked about this already. They provide energy. Okay, but not only do they provide it, in other words, they release it, they also store it. And we talked about the glycogen or the starch, if you're an animal or a plant. But some other lesser known functions is number 3 there. They preserve muscle. Okay, they can help restore and keep muscles replenished. And the 4th one, they promote good digestion. We're all familiar with need of fiber in our diets, and whether you just make sure that happens with food you eat, or you take a supplement, or a powder or whatever it might be. But the idea of getting proper amounts of fiber so your food can be digested properly, and the subsequent processes can happen as they need to, which we don't need to go into. Well, that's our video on carbohydrate general information, with the idea of talking about monosaccharides as well. So in our next video, we'll talk about disaccharides and polysaccharides. We'll see you then.